Intro. I remember as a kid sitting in the classroom and chaos being all around. All the kids were chattering and being distracted by each other. Yet, when the teacher sat down on a chair and opened a book and said the following, "Once upon a time," that's all it took to get the students to calm down and listen to the story. What is it behind the words "once upon a time" that can do such a tremendous shift in awareness? This phrase has been used for thousands of years. Many cultures have the same meaning, yet different words. Each time we hear this phrase, we are tapping into our true essence, and we just aren't aware of it. Something so cozy happens to us. It's like we are transported to a place where there's a beautiful fireplace, and a fire is gently sending out sparks of light that are mesmerizing. We are sitting in a comfy chair and watching the flicker of the fire. At times the fire makes a popping sound that delights the soul. You really can't put words into this experience. We all have our once upon a time stories that lies within us. Mind you, this isn't the first time you are alive. Since the dawn of creation, you have been around. We just think that the world around us is all that there is. When we hear the words "once upon a time," something inside recognizes that, and we respond, even just for a few moments in time. We settle down, we calm down. One small spark of the fire ever so gently comes to the surface. Mind you, the more attention you pay to this, the more attention it starts paying to you. We are so busy doing that we have no time to just be. That is the crux of the problem. Stories are made to tap into the true essence that lies within. Each one of us is like raindrops, different and unique. Yet a raindrop's goal is to merge into the ocean. That is its true nature. We think we are separated from each other. That is the problem. We wouldn't have the problems that we have today if we truly experience the unity behind all things. We get so preoccupied with the external. Come, sit by the fireplace and simply relax. There's a story to be told. This story is a part of you. It may seem like someone else's story, yet the essence is the same. Your soul is speaking to you. Your soul is so much grander than what you think. You are infinite. You are the universe and just don't know it. Once upon a time. The Sound of Silence by Linda Ann Brown. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Everyone knows the iconic Simon and Garfunkel song. But do you know the amazing story behind the first line of The Sound of Silence? It began when Arthur Art Garfunkel a Jewish kid from Queens enrolled in Columbia University. During freshman orientation, Art met a student from Buffalo named Sandy Greenberg, and they immediately bonded over their shared passion for literature and music. Art and Sandy became roommates and best friends. With the idealism of youth, they promised to be there for each other no matter what. Soon after starting college, Sandy was struck by tragedy. His vision became blurry, and although doctors diagnosed it as temporary conjunctivitis, the problem grew worse. Finally, after seeing a specialist, Sandy received the devastating news that severe glaucoma was destroying his optic nerve. The young man, with such a bright future, would soon be completely blind. Sandy was devastated and fell into a deep depression. He gave up his dream to become a lawyer and moved back to Buffalo, where he worried about being a burden to his financially struggling family. Consumed with shame and fear, Sandy cut off contacts with his old friends, refusing to answer letters or return phone calls. Then suddenly, to Sandy's shock, his buddy Art showed up at their front door. He was not going to allow his best friend to give up on life, so he bought a ticket and flew to Buffalo unannounced. Art convinced Sandy to give college another go and promised that he would be right by his side to make sure he didn't fall, literally or figuratively. Art kept his promise, faithfully escorting Sandy around campus and effectively serving as his eyes. It was important to Art that even though Sandy had been plunged into a world of darkness, he should never feel alone. Art actually started calling himself Darkness to demonstrate his empathy with his friend. He'd say things like, "Darkness is going to read to you now." Art organized his life around helping Sandy. One day, Art was guiding Sandy through crowded Grand Central Station when he suddenly said he had to go and let his friend alone and petrified. Sandy stumbled, bumped into people, and fell, cutting a gash in his shin. After a couple of hellish hours, Sandy finally got on the right subway train. After exiting the station at 116th Street, Sandy bumped into someone who quickly apologized, and Sandy immediately recognizes Art's voice. Turned out his trusty friend had followed him the whole way home, making sure he was safe and giving him the priceless gift of independence. Sandy later said, "That moment was the spark that caused me to live a completely different life, without fear, without doubt. For that I am tremendously grateful to my friend." Sandy graduated from Columbia and then earned graduate degrees at Harvard and Oxford. He married his high school sweetheart and became an extremely successful entrepreneur and philanthropist. While at Oxford, Sandy got a call from Art. This time Art was the one who needed help. He formed a folk rock duo with his high school pal Paul Simon, and they desperately needed $400 to record their first album. Sandy and his wife Sue had literally $404 in their bank account, but without hesitation, Sandy gave his old friend what he needed. Art and Paul's first album was not a success, but one of the songs, "The Sound of Silence," became a #1 hit a year later. The opening line echoed the way Sandy always greeted Art. Simon and Garfunkel went on to become one of the most beloved musical acts in history. The two Columbia graduates, each of whom has added so much to the world in his own way, are still best friends. Art Garfunkel said that while he became friends with Sandy, my real life emerged. I became a better guy in my own eyes and began to see who I was, somebody who gives to a friend. Sandy described himself as the luckiest man in the world. Adapted from Sam Greenberg's memoir, Hello Darkness, My Old Friend, how daring dreams and underlying friendships turned one man's blindness into an extraordinary vision for life. Chuck Cook by Mark Blackburn. After a train of bad news, such as the loss of Gary Hill, Williams v. and the very bad global news from Paris today, it is my great pleasure to share some good news. I am posting delightful news about our classmate, Chuck Cook. I have the pleasure to announce that at age 62, Charles Arthur Cook has become a father about 6 months after Chuck received his first Social Security check. This amuses me on many levels. I have a granddaughter who will be 15 next spring, but Charlie Cook has a son who will not turn 1 until next May. If there is one word to describe Chuck, what would that be? Virile? Those still residing in the harbor area probably have spotted Chuck riding his bicycle around Newport. He has led a life entirely suitable to Newport and to himself, but clearly out of the mainstream. I will recall when Chuck was 17, after reading and researching carefully, not skills Chuck applied to school very often, he determined he would be a vegetarian. This was pretty uncommon back in 1971. His parents, the worst I've ever known, promptly kicked Chuck out of the house in response. An inconvenience, to be sure, but trust me, Chuck was much better off, perhaps due to his affinity for vegetables. Chuck worked in the produce industry for about a decade. His longest stint was at a produce market called Growers Ranch on Newport Boulevard. I believe for 3 to 4 years he filled out a 1040 form on April 15th, as most of us tax slavers do. Increasingly, Chuck did more casual labor, migrated more into landscaping, something he seemed to have a talent for. He had a few side jobs, including one helping one of the Nadeau brothers at farmers markets and working as assistant to an electrician. For the past 25 years, Chuck has serviced a loyal following of landscaping customers in the Newport Heights area. Through the years, Chuck has been very true to himself, marching to the beat of his own unique drum. Chuck's adoptive parents punished him with a close-shaved haircut 4 times a year when report cards came out. While Chuck's adoptive father was allegedly an intelligence engineer, he couldn't seem to fathom that his adopted son would not have inherited his same math skills. So Chuck was made to feel like a failure on many levels, but found his dignity in living cheaply and simply with his integrity and wonderful sense of humor. He owed one car in his life that his parents made him buy, selling it by age 23. He has met 99% of his transportation needs with a bicycle. He's in great shape. Roughly 30 years ago, Chuck began going south for the winter. For many years he would spend the winters at the beaches of Oaxaca, Mexico, and would return with the most exquisite hammocks made in Mexico. He sold those for a markup upon his return. For the last 20 years he has gone to Southeast Asia and is a very expert on Thailand and Cambodia. He used to spend about 5 months a year there. Then he would hold his nose and return and work in Newport, doing landscape work for 7 months. Gradually spending more time there, he is now in Southeast Asia perhaps 7 months and only in the U.S. for 5. Chuck and I both find the U.S. less tolerable each year. He is a master of living frugally, which allows him to live the life of a retired millionaire half of each year on Asia's lower cost of living. Chuck will only work 6 hours a day, 4 days a week, 6 months out of the year. He will only work outdoors. The rest of the time he is relaxing on the most beautiful beaches in the world. His life is simple. His requirements are few. It is a lifestyle that, though unconventional, has served him very well. Yes, the IRS wishes he would work harder and churn more money, but Chuck has an internal wisdom that stupefies me. Yeah, he still sucks at algebra, but I honestly think he's one of the happiest people I have ever been privileged to know. Chuck practices meditation every day and has remarkable discipline about his personal habits. He is still vegetarian after 40+ years, has never had health insurance, nor do I believe has he ever seen a doctor in 40 years. He has never married. Chuck's son was born last May. His name is Amar Charles. Chuck has known his son's mother for 6 years. Her family operates a farm. His destiny and legacy seems to be in Thailand, a free and happy country. Chuck is not on Facebook, but I can hook you up with his email on request.
Betsy Tepalian. Mrs. Tepalian was my poetry teacher in my senior year. She taught me the love of poetry. I remember one day we had an assignment to read a poem. I found a spiritual quote and read it to the class. She asked me what it means, and I said it was self-explanatory. To be honest, I had no clue. She knew that and was kind not to go further. She inspired me to look at ways that are different from society. There is the world where words come up to the surface to be a creative force for mankind. She helped me to dive deep to discover the pearls of life.
Betty Tepalian, Poetry Assignment. I remember one day, Mrs. Tepalian gave us an assignment. We were to find a poem that we liked and had to read it to the class. I just started to learn how to meditate. I chose this incredible Eastern poem.
I don't remember the name of it. Somehow I gravitated to it. I didn't know its meaning. Anyway, all the students gave their readings. It was my turn to read the poem. I read the poem, and my teacher asked if I could critique the poem. I said it was self-explanatory. To be honest, it was at such a deep level. I didn't have the life experience to say anything. She has such great compassion. She didn't press me on it. Most teachers wouldn't let you get away so easily. Yet, a seed was planted, and she didn't crush the seed. Years later, I love to ponder life and its meanings. I often wondered how my life would be if she was a typical teacher who had her rules. If you don't follow them exactly, you will feel the consequences. To this day, I am grateful. She had great intuition and saw my struggle. She gave me inspiration to follow my dreams. That is what a teacher is all about. I'm still learning the powers of words in my everyday life. I feel so honored to have such a teacher.
Ducks splashing in driveway. Once upon a time, in the land of Oz, which is now Kansas, little Ricky and his wife Barbara were out for a countryside drive. At times they would see an elderly man spraying his driveway on a hot summer day. To their amazement, many ducks were gathered in the driveway and were splashing like kids. It was a sight to behold. You could see the glee and happiness from these ducks. They were having the time of their lives. The elderly man had so much love and compassion for the ducks. They developed such a bond of friendship. We would see this happening quite often on a hot summer day. Usually this would take place around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening.
Did Jainism help shape the American Civil Rights Movement? The American Civil Rights Movement during the mid-1950s to early 70s marked one of the most tumultuous periods of social change and unrest in America's history. A wave of political and social conservatism consumed the national attention during the 1950s after the end of World War II, and now with the African-American Civil Rights Movement in full swing, the fires of change swept through America culture. So how could James, who are hardly known outside of academia in the United States at this time, have any influence on social movements in America? As with many events that are life, it isn't the impact that reaches you, but the ripple. Meet our impact point, Srimad Rajchandra. Srimad Rajchandra was a Jain philosopher who lived in India between 1867 and 1901. After watching a funeral prior at a young age, it is said that Srimad Rajchandra suddenly recollected all his past lives, thus gleaning all the knowledge and spiritual wisdom he obtained in those periods. He would go on to spend the rest of his life teaching and writing about spiritual concepts within the Jain framework until he died at the age of 32. His most important literary work, which bears his name, is hardly regarded even today. What is interesting about his story, among other things, is that Srimad Rajchandra made a very special friendship with one of history's most endearing activists, Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi himself regarded Srimad Rajchandra as not only a friend, but a spiritual guide. I have drunk to my heart's content the nectar of religion that was offered to me by Sri Ramachandra. Rajchandra hated the spread of irreligion in the name of religion, and he condemned lies, hypocrisy, and such other vices which were getting a free hand in his time. He considered the whole world as his relative, and his sympathy extended to all living beings of all ages. Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi is who as many of us think of regarding civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance. Under the influences of his native Hindu faith, his mentor, Srimad Rajchandra, who practiced ahimsa, long, non-injury, and a love for freedom, Gandhi began civil rights and liberation movements in South Africa during his early years as an attorney before moving on to his native India. Gandhi is known for his non-violent resistance against British rule in India, which after years of struggle led to its independence in 1947. He was assassinated in 1948. The science of war leads one to dictatorship, pure and simple. The science of nonviolence alone can lead one to pure democracy. Power based on love is 1,000 times more effective and permanent than power derived from fear of punishment. Mahatma Gandhi. From America's South, its own philosopher and a propagator of nonviolence and change, soon rose Martin Luther King Jr., a Baptist preacher from Georgia, was a tremendous personality, an academic marvel with a flair for leadership and activism. He helped found the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and was a prominent leader in the NAACP. King led the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, which opposed the Montgomery, Alabama transit segregation policy and played a pivotal role in the 1963 March on Washington, where he delivered his I Have a Dream speech. While King cited many influences for his position on nonviolent activism, he spoke warmly of none other than Mahatma Gandhi. King was greatly impacted by Gandhi's work after visiting India, a trip they may have helped shape the American political and social structure forever. Since being in India, I am more convinced than ever before that the method of nonviolent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for justice and human dignity. In a real sense, Mahatma Gandhi embodied in his life certain universal principles that are inherent in the moral structures of the universe, and these principles are as inescapable as the law of gravitation. Martin Luther King Jr. With the help of King and many others in the struggle for racial equality, America eventually adopted the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Immigration and National Service Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968, among others. For his service to humanity, King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He was assassinated in 1968. Ripples, Martin Luther King Jr. was an American Christian. Gandhi was a Hindu. Srimad Rajchandra was a Jain philosopher. Lord Mahavira taught his people 2,500 years ago in northern India. Each ripple reached out inch by inch and eventually covered the world. And the influence of nonviolent activism is still alive today with our current Occupy movement, which has spread globally. So now we see that how Jainism sufficiently influenced social change across centuries and nations without converting a single soul, without coercion, without force, but simply because it makes sense. What sort of ripple will you form today? My trip to the land of Gandhi. In his account of his India tour published in Ebony magazine, King notes that Gandhi's spirit is still alive, though some of his disciples have misgivings about this when they look around and find nobody today who comes near the statue of the Mahatma. Lamenting India's pervasive economic inequalities, King observed that the Bargo, white, black, or brown, behaves about the same the world over, and he calls upon the West to aid India's development in a spirit of international brotherhood, not national selfishness. For a long time, I had wanted to take a trip to India. Even as a child, the entire Orient held a strange fascination for me. The elephants, the tigers, the temples, the snake charmers, and all other storybook characters. While the Montgomery boycott was going on, India's Gandhi was the guiding light of our technique of non-violent social change. We spoke of him often, so as soon as our victory over bus segregation was won, some of my friends said, "Why don't you go to India and see for yourself what the Mahatma, whom you so admire, has wrought?" In 1956, when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, India's Prime Minister, made a short visit to the United States, he was gracious enough to say that he wished that he and I had met and had his diplomatic representatives make inquiries as to the possibility of my visiting his country sometime soon. Our former American ambassador to India, Chester Bowes, wrote me along the same lines. But every time I was to make a trip to India, something would interfere. At one time, it was my visit, my prior commitment to Guyana. Another time, my publishers were pressing me to finish writing Stride Toward Freedom. Then along came Miss Izola Wari-Kari, when she struck me with that Japanese letter opener on that Saturday afternoon in September as I sat autographing books in a Harlem store. She not only knocked out the travel plans that I had, but almost everything else as well. After I recovered from the near-fatal encounter I was finally released by my doctors, it occurred to me that it might be better to get in the trip to India before plunging too deeply once again into the sea of the Southern segregation struggle. I prefer not to take this long trip alone and asked my wife and my friend, Lawrence Reddick, to accompany me. Coletta was particularly interested in the women in India and Dr. Reddick in the history and government of that great country. He had written my biography, Crusader Without Violence, and said that my true test would come when the people who knew Gandhi looked me over and passed judgment upon me and the Montgomery movement. The three of us made a sort of a three-headed team with 6 eyes and 6 ears for looking and listening. The Christopher Reynolds Foundation made a grant to the American Friends Service Committee to cover most of the expenses of the trip, and the Southern Christian Leaders Conference and the Montgomery Improvement Association added their support. The Gandhi Memorial Trust of India extended an official invitation through diplomatic channels for our visit. And so on February 3rd, 1959, just before midnight, we left New York by plane. En route, we stopped in Paris with Richard Wright, an old friend of Reddick's, who brought us to date on European attitudes on the Negro question and gave us a taste of the best French cooking. We missed our plane connection in Switzerland because of fog, arriving in India after a roundabout route 2 days late. But from the time we came down out of the clouds at Bombay on September 10th until March 12th, when we waved goodbye at the New Delhi airport, we had one of the most concentrated and eye-opening experiences of our lives. There is so much to tell that I can only touch upon a few of the high points. At the outset, let me say that we had a grand reception in India. The people showered upon us the most gracious hospitality imaginable. We were graciously received by the Prime Minister, the President, and the Vice President of the nation, members of Parliament, governors, and chief ministers of various Indian states, writers, professors, social reformers, and at least one saint. Since our pictures were in the newspapers very often, it was not unusual for us to be recognized by crowds in public places and on public conveyances. Occasionally, I would take a morning walk in the large cities, and out of the most unexpected places, someone would emerge and ask, "Are you Martin Luther King?" Virtually every door was open to us. We had hundreds of invitations that the limited time did not allow us to accept. We were looked upon as brothers, with the color of our skins as something of an asset. But the strongest bond of this fraternity was a common cause minority and colonial people in America, Africa, and Asia, struggling to throw off racism and imperialism. We had the opportunity to share our views with thousands of Indian people through endless conversations and numerous discussion sessions. I spoke before university groups and public meetings all over India. Because of the keen interest that the Indian people have in the race problem, these meetings were usually packed. Occasionally, interpreters were used, but on the whole, I spoke to audiences that understood English. The Indian people loved to listen to the Negro spirituals. Therefore, Coletta ended up singing as much as I lectured. We discovered that autograph seekers are not confined to America. After appearance in public meetings and while visiting villages, we often were besieged for autographs. Even while riding planes, more than once pilots came into the cabin from the cockpit requesting our signatures. We got a good press throughout our stay, thanks to the Indian papers. The Montgomery bus boycott was already well known in that country. Indian publications perhaps gave a better continuity of our 381-day bus strike than did most of the papers in the United States. Occasionally, I met some America fellow citizens who even now ask me how the bus boycott is going. Apparently, never have read that A Great Day of Bus Integration, December 21st, 1956, closed that chapter of our history. We held press conferences in all the large cities, Delhi, Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay, and talked with newspaper men almost everywhere we went. They asked sharp questions and at times appeared to be hostile, but that was just their way of bringing out the story that they were after. As reporters, they were scrupulously fair with us, and their editorials showed an amazing grasp of what was going on in America. and other parts of the world. The trip had a great impact upon me personally. It's wonderful to be in Gandhi's land, to talk with his son, his grandsons, his cousins, and other relatives, to share the reminiscence of his close comrades, to visit his ashram, to see the countless memorials for him, and finally to lay a wreath on his entombed ashes and regard. I left India more convinced than ever before that nonviolent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for freedom. It was a marvelous thing to see the amazing results of a nonviolent campaign. The aftermath of hatred and bitterness that usually follows a violent campaign was found nowhere in India. Today, a mutual friendship based on complete equality exists between the Indian and British people within the Commonwealth. The way of acquiescence leads to moral and spiritual suicide. The ways of violence leads to bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. But the way of nonviolence leads to redemption and the creation of the beloved community. The spirit of Gandhi is very much alive in India today. Some of his disciples have misgivings. Some of his disciples have misgivings about this when they remember the drama of the fight for national independence, and when they look around and find nobody today who comes near the statue of the Mahatma. But any objective observer must report that Gandhi is not only the greatest figure in India's history, but that his influence is felt in almost every aspect of life and public policy today. India can never forget Gandhi. For example, the Gandhi Memorial Trust, also known as the Gandhi Samak Net, collected some 130 million soon after the death of the father of the nation. This was perhaps the largest spontaneous mass monetary contribution to memory of a single individual in the history of the world. This fund, along with support from the government and other institutions, is resulting in the spread and development of Gandhian philosophy, the implementation of his constructive program, the erection of libraries, and the publication of works by and about the life and times of Gandhi. Posterity could not escape him even if he tried. By all standards of measurement, he is one of the half-dozen greatest men in the world's history. I was delighted that the Gandhians accepted us with open arms. They praised our experiment with the nonviolent resistance technique at Montgomery. They seemed to look upon it as an outstanding example of the possibilities of its use in Western civilization. To them, as to me, it also suggests that nonviolent resistance, when planned and positive in action, can work effectively even under totalitarian regimes. We argued this point in some length with the groups of African students who are today studying in India. They felt that nonviolent resistance could only work in a situation where the resistors had a potential ally in the conscience of the opponent. We soon discovered that they, like many others, tended to confuse passive resistance with non-resistance. This is completely wrong. True nonviolent resistance is not unrealistic submission to evil power. It is rather a courageous confrontation of evil by the power of love. In that faith, that is better to be the recipient of violence than the inflictor of it, since the latter only multiplies the existence of violence and bitterness in the universe, while the former may develop a sense of shame in the opponent, and therefore bring about a transformation and change of heart. Nonviolence resistance does call for love, but is not a sentimental love. It is a very stern love that would organize itself into collection action to right a wrong by taking on itself side. While I understand the reasons why oppressed people often turn to violence in their struggle for freedom, it is my firm belief that the crusade for interdependence and human dignity that is now reaching a climax in Africa will have a more positive effect on the world. If it is waged along the lines that were first demonstrated in the continent by Gandhi himself. India is a vast country with vast problems. We flew over the long stretches from north to south, east to west. Took train for shorter jumps and used automobiles and jeeps to get us into the less accessible places. India is about a third the size of the United States, but has almost 3 times as many people. Everywhere we went, we saw crowded humanity on the roads, in the city streets and squares, even the villages. Most of the people are poor, poorly dressed. The average income per person is less than $70 per year. Nevertheless, their turbans for their heads, loose flowing, wrap around dhotis that they wear instead of trousers, and the flowing saris that the women wear instead of dresses are colorful and picturesque. Many Indians wear part native and part Western dress. We think that in the United States we have a housing problem. But in the city of Bombay, for example, over 500,000 people sleep out of doors every night. They are mostly unattached, unemployed, or partially employed males. They carry their beddings with them like foot soldiers and enroll each night in any unoccupied space they could find on the sidewalk, in a railway station, or the entrance of a shop that is closed for the evening. The food shortage is so widespread that it's estimated that less than 30% of the people get what we would call 3 square meals a day. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, we spoke of a third of a nation being ill-housed, ill-clad, and ill-fed. For India today, simply change 1/3 to 2/3 in that state, and that would be about right. As great as it is unemployment, underemployment is even greater. 70% of the Indian people are classified as agricultural workers, and most of them do less than 200 days of farm labor per year because of the seasonal fluctuations and other uncertainties of Mother Nature. Jobless men roam the city streets. Great ills flow from the poverty in India, but strategically there's relatively little crime. Here it is another concrete manifestation of the wonderful spiritual quality of the Indian people. They are poor, jammed together, and half-starved, but they did not take it out on each other. They are a kindly people. They do not abuse each other, verbally or physically, as ready as we do. We saw one fistfight in India during our days. In contrast to the poverty-stricken, there are Indians who are rich, have luxury homes, landed estates, fine clothes, and show evidence of overeating. The bourgeois, white, black, or brown, behaves about the same world over. And there it is, even then, the problem of segregation. We call it race in India, they call it caste in India. In both places it means that some are considered inferior, treated as though they deserve less. We were surprised and delighted to see that India has made greater progress in the fight against caste untouchability than we have made in our own country against race segregation. Both nations have federal laws against discrimination, acknowledging, of course, that decision of our Supreme Court is the law of our land. But after this has been said, we must recognize that there are great differences between what India has done and what we have done on a problem that is very civil. The leaders of India have placed their moral powers behind their laws. From the Prime Minister down to the village councilman, everyone declares publicly that untouchability is wrong. But the United States, some of our highest officials decline to render a moral judgment on segregation, and some from the South publicly boast of their determination to maintain segregation. This would be unthinkable in India. Moreover, Gandhi not only spoke against the caste system, but he acted against it. He took untouchables by the hand and led him into the temples from which they had been excluded. To equal that, President Eisenhower would take a Negro child by the hand and lead her into the Central High School in Little Rock. Gandhi also renamed the untouchables, calling them Arjanas, which means children of God. The government has thrown its full weight behind the program of giving the Harjanas an equal chance in society, especially when it comes to jobs, opportunities, education, and housing. India leaders in and out of the government are conscious of the country's other great problems and are theoretically grappling with them. The country seems to be divided. Some say that India should become westernized and modernized as quickly as possible so that she might raise her standards of living. Foreign capital and foreign industry should be invited in, for in this lies the salvation of the almost desperate situation. On the other hand, there are others, perhaps the majority, who say that westernization, with it, the evils of materialism, cutthroat competition, and rugged individualism, that India will lose her soul if she takes for chasing Yankee dollars, and that big machines will only raise the living standards of the comparative few workers who get jobs, but the greater number of people will be displaced and be thus worse off they are now. Yankees Prime Minister Nehru, who had once been an intellectual and a man charged with the practical responsibilities of heading the government, seems to steer a middle course between these two extreme attitudes. In a talk with him, he indicated that he felt that some industrialization was absolutely necessary, that there were some things that only big or heavy industries could do for the country, but if the states keep a watchful eye on the developments, most of the pitfalls may be avoided. At the same time, Mr. Nehru gave support to the movement that would encourage and expand the handicraft arts such as spinning and weaving in home and village, and thus creating a much economical self-help and autonomy that's possible to the local community. There is a great movement in India that is almost unknown in America, and its center is the campaign for land reform known as Bauda. It would solve India's great economical and social change by consent, not by force. The Budundas are the sainted Bindu Bhave and Jarishkanama Narayana, a highly sensitive intellectual who was trained in American colleges. Their idea is a self-sufficient village. Their program envisions persuading large landholders to give up some of their holdings to landless peasants, providing small land ownership to give their individual ownership for uncommon cooperative ownerships in the villages, encouraging farmers and villagers to spin and weave their cloth for their own clothes during their spare time from their agricultural pursuits. Since these measures would answer the questions of employment, food, and clothing, the village would then, through cooperative action, make just about everything they would need or get through barter or exchange from other villages. Accordingly, Each village would be virtually self-sufficient and would thus free itself from the domination of the central centers that are today like evil lodestreams drawing the people away from the rural areas, concentrating them in city slums and debauching them with urban vices. At least this is the argument of the Bodhisattva and other Gandhians. Such ideas sound strange or archaic to Western ears. However, the Indians have already achieved greater results than we Americans would ever expect. For example, billions of acres of land have been given up by rich landlords. In addition, billions of acres have been given to cooperative management by small farmers. On the other hand, the Bodhisattva shrink from giving their movement, their organization, a drive that we in America would venture to get, that would just have an order to keep pace with the magnitude of the problem that everyone is trying to solve. Even the government's 5-year plans fall short in that they do not appear to be of sufficient scope to embrace their objectives. Thus, the 3 5-year plans were designated to provide 25 million new jobs over a 15-year period. But the birth rate of India is 6 million per year. That means in 15 years there will be 9 million more people, less those who have died or retired, looking for 15 million new jobs. In other words, if the planning were 100% successful, it would not keep pace with the growth of problems it is trying to solve. As what it should be, we surely do not have the answer, but we do feel certain that India needs help. She must have outside capital and technically know-how. It is in the interest of the United States and the West to help supply these needs and not attach strings to the gifts. Whatever we do should be done in a spirit of international brotherhood, not national selfishness. It should be not done merely because of diplomatic expedient, but is morally compelling. At the same time, it will rebound to the credit of the West if India is able to maintain her democracy while solving her problems. It would be a boon to democracy if one of the great nations of the world, with almost 400 million people, proved that it's possible to provide a good living for everyone without surrendering to a dictatorship of either the right or left. Today, India is a tremendous force for peace and nonviolence at home and abroad. It is a land where the idealists and the intellectuals are yet respected. We shall want to help India preserve her soul and this help to save our own.
When I first moved to Hawaii, I learned that an old junior high friend was living on Maui. I hadn't spoken to him in probably 20 years. Paul was a twin too, so we had a lot in common. Both of us were surfers. When I met him after 20 years, I was real impressed by him. He was truly a genuine human being. He carried that aloha spirit. He was a genuine. He was full of love and compassion. He had a lot of friends on this island and introduced me to them. I didn't pick up any ego from him at all. We became greater friends. I would meet him very early in the mornings at the beach. He taught me the ropes about surfing in Hawaii. He had a great sense of humor. Both of us were involved during our quest to find God. We shared a lot of love and brotherhood together. I found out that he was dying from cancer. He had cancer for 5 years. It would come and go. Paul never complained about it. When I was in his presence, I felt gratitude that I knew a human being like this. In the end, Paul died. Hundreds of surfers came to a huge party at the beach. This is what Paul wanted. He wanted each one of us to cherish life. Even amidst his death, his presence was there. Paul, wherever you are, I love you. Aloha. Nick Roth. I have known Nick since junior high school. We went on many surfing adventures in high school. Nick is one of those guys that whatever he touches turns to gold. He was good at whatever sport he played in. Yet at surfing, it seemed he was destined to be a surfer. If Nick was young today, he would be, in my eyes, one of the best surfers in the world. He would have tons of money. Nick doesn't surf for fame, fortune, or glory. He surfs because it's a part of his life. He is an artist when it comes to surfing. He has nothing to prove. He just smiles like a wise man. One funny story is about Nick and his dad. He would call me Electric Man. He said my voice would sound like an electric computer. Years later, I stopped and pondered what he said. It seems like his subconscious was onto something. He was picking something up about me and couldn't quite pinpoint it. To this day, he was one of the only people who picked up that I was different. Nick moved from Orange County to Depot Bay about 10 years ago. He still surfs at 64 years old. I saw him for the first time in years, and we connected. That time is endless. It just seems like yesterday we saw each other. In fact, it was over 30 years ago. Nick is definitely a web in my life. We have had many great journeys together.
Joseph John Campbell, March 26, 1904 to October 30th, 1987, was an American writer. He was a professor of literature at Sarah Lawrence College who worked in comparative mythology and comparative religion. His work covers many aspects of the human experience. Campbell's best-known work in his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, 1949, in which he discusses his theory on the journeys of the archetype hero shared by the world's mythologies, termed the monolith. Since the publication of The Heroes with a Thousand Faces, Campbell's theories have been applied by a wide variety of modern writers and artists. His philosophy has been summarized by his own often repeated phrase, "Follow your bliss." He gained recognition in Hollywood when George Lucas credited Campbell's work as influencing his Star Wars saga. Campbell's approach to folklore topics such as myth and its influence on popular culture has been the subject of criticism, including from folklorists. Mythical discovery within the inner realms of outer space. Joseph Campbell meets George Lucas. Part 1. A much friendlier meetup than Obi-Wan and Vader. Joseph Campbell, 1904 to 1987, was a world-renowned mythologist who helped modern society understand the true power that storytelling has in our culture and within our personal lives. He studied and identified the universal themes and archetypes that are present in mythical storytelling across history and across the world. His seminal work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, outlined what Campbell called the hero's journey, a motif of adventure and personal transformation that is used in nearly every culture mythological framework. George Lucas was an adamant admirer of Campbell's writings, and he used them as a direct reference in his creation of Star Wars. The two didn't meet face to face until after Lucas had already finished his original trilogy of films. Part 1. We look to the stars and wonder. Light from multiple, infinite directions and distances meets our gaze, and within our mythical imagination, as Joseph Campbell described it, we begin to tell stories. As Campbell points out, the visual beauties that inspire a saga like Star Wars are derived as much from within us as it is outside. This image is necessarily physical and thus apparently of outer space, Campbell says. The inherent connotation is always, however, physiological and metaphysical, which is to say, of inner space. And as we look to the stars, we inherently reflect it. It is what Campbell calls the inner reaches of outer space. In 1984, Joseph Campbell came to the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, and an architectural beauty rebuilt from the Panama Pacific International Expedition in 1915, and near the current location of Lucasfilm's headquarters. The conic dome had been constructed to reflect the classical style of ancient Rome and Greece and evokes emotions as it could be an archetype of myth itself. It was an apt setting for Campbell to lead discussions on the inner teachings of outer spaces. George Lucas was in the audience. Though he had long admired and studied Campbell back to the time of his early drafts of Star Wars, he had yet to meet the man who would call my Yoda. San Francisco certainly wasn't the swampy planet of Dagobah. The meeting would be, in fact, the opposite of Master Yoda and the young Luke Skywalker. This time it was the Master who was to learn just how pivotal his teachings could be for their apprentice. Outer space is within much as the laws of space are within us. Outer and inner space are the same. We know furthermore that we have actually been born from space. Campbell told audiences in San Francisco. He continued to describe the wonderland of myth when an almost circular path of inspiration moves between that which we see and that which we imagine. From the outer world, the senses carried images to mind which do not become myth, however, until we transform by fusion with an accordion insight. Awaken as imagination from the inner world of body. As Yoda tells Luke in The Empire Strikes Back, luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. The light of the stars is fully within us. After the mesmerizing discussions, Luke was introduced to Campbell via their mutual friend, scientist and Nobel laureate Barbara McClintock. Although they did not connect at first words, as McClintock remembered to Campbell's biography, I got them sitting together. But Joe was holding court like he would. There was a young man there, David Abrams, the only true magician I ever known in my life. I called David over and said, "See if you can get those two talking to each other." David went over and did a trick. It involved putting George's hands on Joe's hands, and that was it. The spark had been ignited, and a friendship had begun. Campbell and Lucas took a liking to each other. They enjoyed discussing ideas, mythology, and particularly the influence of Campbell's The the hero with 1,000 faces on Lucas's filmmaking. Their relationship blossomed over the coming years, though surprisingly, Campbell had yet to see any of the Star Wars films. A few years after their first meeting, the time finally came for Lucas to show Campbell his work. Lucas would tell Campbell biographers, "At one point I talked about Star Wars," and he'd heard about Star Wars. I'd said, "Would you be interested at all in seeing it?" At this point, I finished all three of them. He said, "I'll see all three of them." I said, "Would you like to see one a day?" Because he was going to be here for around a week. No, I want to see them all at once." And so Campbell, along with his wife Jean, came to Marin County, north of San Francisco. It was on a Sunday when Lucas took the Campbells to his recently finished Skywalker Ranch. Lucas remembered, "I showed them in the morning, A New Hope, and we had lunch. I showed another one in the afternoon, The Empire Strikes Back, and then we had dinner. Then I showed another one in the evening, Return of the Jedi." It was actually the first time anybody, I think, had seen all three of them together at one time. Their mutual friend, Barbara McClintock, joined in for the third film, and she remembered the moment after it ended. It was just us and George. It was very quiet in the dark, and Joe said, "You know, I thought real art had stopped with Picasso, Joyce, and Manet. Now I know it hasn't." Myth is often sometimes experienced unconsciously by a collective. Most audience members in the summer of 1977 were not aware of the age-old archetypes at work with A New Hope. They simply enjoyed the film. The story had their attraction. Even the creators themselves can be a part of this collective unconscious. Composer John Williams was in the audience for one of the Campbell's lectures at Skywalker Ranch and commented, "Until Campbell told us what Star Wars meant, we regarded it as a Saturday morning space movie. Nevertheless, the power resides in the experience quality equally as much as the understanding." In his book, The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, Campbell meditates on the universe's immensity. 20 million Milky Ways of billions of exploding nuclear furnaces flying from each other through spaces not to be measured. The universe of which we speak so easily, comprising literally quintillions of self-consuming stars. To contemplate a starry sky itself is to contemplate on a mythical level, and as scientific discovery continuously redefines our understanding of the cosmos, certainly our mythical perspective must change as well. Campbell himself states, "What does all this do to mythology? George Lucas would help to redefine the mythical framework for the space age, and in effect prove that the discoveries and revelations of a storyteller could be influential as those of an astronomer." In the late 1980s, as Campbell entered the final years of his life, his friendship with Lucas continued. The apprentice would perform a fitting tribute to his mentor. Together with journalist Bill Moyers, they ensured Campbell's teachings would remain as immortal as the very myths themselves. The story continues in the second and final installment of this two-part article. Once upon a time was a man. If there was a man who discovered the meaning of once upon a time in the 20th century, it was Joseph Campbell. He spent his whole life investigating the myths and stories from civilizations all around the world. Mind you, he even studied ancient civilizations and their myths. His Power of Myth series on public television with Bill Moyers was an incredible event for its time. I was clearly inspired by the wisdom that he had in uniting all the myths together. All myths are talking about discovering the jewel within. All myths talk about man must go on the inner journey to find this hidden jewel. Signposts are all around, yet do we have the eyes to see? Joseph Campbell was one of those rare individuals whose entire life was spent solving the puzzle of life. Years later, the world is still trying to understand what his message was all about. We are so caught up with our 9-to-5 existence that we miss out discovering the jewel within.
One incident that still remains to this day is the following. One day, while we were in high school, my dear friend Mark Blackburn and his uncle Carl took my brother on a boat ride. It takes probably half an hour to reach the ocean from where we took off in the harbor. We got off the harbor, we moved left to where we directly off Big Crota, where my brother and I served as a kid. We were sitting there, and all of a sudden, we feel this tremendous rush of energy with thousands of bubbles underneath the boat. It's kind of scary. Finally, this huge well emerges to the surface, probably 10 feet away. When I saw its eyes, it was such an incredible sight. Pure wisdom, kindness, compassion, and supreme intelligence. Today, this day, probably 46 years later, I can still vision this in my mind's eye. I always was in love with dolphins and whales, but to see one in the wild like this was truly a gift. I could sense and see the magnificence of such a beautiful creature of God. If he wanted to, he could completely destroy the boat, but that's not its nature. We need to learn from the dolphins and whales in our lives. They have so much we can learn from. Mark Blackburn. I've known Mark since kindergarten. Mark has a place in my heart. We have been good friends for years. He loves adventure. Mark is extremely intelligent and humorous at the same time. Good traits to have. He always has a wise crack you can see from his mouth. He is actually listening to you. Another good trait. We have been friends for so long that anything goes. We don't try to change one another. Another good trait. Both of us are in the same field, IT. So we know what's going on in the hiring and firing in our industry. We both laugh and cry in the absurdities of life. We talk around 4 times a year. It's nice to hear about his life's adventures. Mark just completed a childhood dream when he was 10 years old. Here's a Facebook post that Mark posted on April 19, 2017. It described his sense for adventure in life. Mark. Why climb the pyramid? The year was 1963. I was 10 years old, attending Mariners Elementary School in Newport Beach, California. We had a school assembly. The father of a student that a handful of my friends might remember gave a slight presentation in the cafeteria of their family's summer vacation trip to Mexico. Many things impressed me, but I was utterly astonished and enchanted to learn that Mexico had pyramids. Up to that point, I thought only Egypt had pyramids. The sides clearly show that this family was allowed to climb to the top of the pyramids. From that instant, it has been a dream of mine to climb to the top of the pyramid. So yes, it took me 23 years to finally make good on that dream. The cost was minimal, $300 round-trip airfare from San Francisco Airport to Mexico. Mexico is on sale right now. For whatever reason, the peso is down against the greenback. Rental cars can be had for $4 a day. Decent hotels for $40 a night. A fine inducement to go now was the fact that UNESCO is trying to make it illegal to climb all pyramids. A gringo, Borracho, a drunk American, fell off Chichen Itza a few years ago to his death and has been closed for climbing ever since. I wanted to go before all of them are closed. It was a fantastic and surreal experience. I am extremely glad I went. I am now glad I was a spy for the NSA in Central America in the late 70s and still retain much of my Spanish-speaking listening ability, which is mandatory for that job. The classmate whose father gave the presentation was Paul Cohen. Does anyone remember what became of him? I suspect he went to Corona Del Mar, not Newport Harbor High School. Since I was sent to my reform school in Hawaii during the last 2 years of Newport Harbor High, I lost track of many folks. That said, I must be at least 8 good Facebook friends who attended Mariners with me and might even remember that slideshow. I cannot put in words how satisfying it was to be at the top of the pyramid on the sun on a Good Friday. Incidentally, I chose that date to go believing I would have Tenochtitlan to myself because everyone in this Catholic nation would be at church. No, they were all at Tenochtitlan. Avoid holidays. On a normal day, the UNESCO historical site 40 minutes north of Mexico City will have 10,000 visitors. On Good Friday, there were 40,000. Bucket list them accomplished. I have one friend and one relative who has climbed the pyramid, Les Jones and my cousin, Gail Demer Saracen, both of them certified these over 50 years earlier. Who else has? Paul Cohen. I really believe in synchronicity. This is from Wikipedia. Synchronicity is a concept first explained by analytical psychologist Carl Jung, which holds that events are meaningful coincidences if they occur with no causal relationship, yet seem to be meaningful related. This post of Paul Cohen's theory got started by synchronicity of events. My friend Mark, see above, goes to Mexico and visits the pyramid at Tenochtitlan just outside Mexico City. This is his childhood dream. When he was 10 years old, he listened to the adventures at a lecture given by Paul Cohen's dad. Paul's family spent the summer in Mexico and Guatemala. Paul's dad was a doctor and did volunteer work for the summer. Mark never knew that Mexico had pyramids. So, Mark goes to Mexico and posts his adventures on Facebook. I read the post and thought, whatever happened to Paul? We go back to first grade. I haven't spoken or heard about Paul for over 46 years. That's a long time. So here's where synchronicity starts kicking in. Mark posts on Facebook. Mary Lou Picard sees the post. Mary Lou Picard. Paul Cohen is in Colorado Springs, Mark. I spoke with him last summer. I'm sure he'd love to hear about your adventure and has family inspired you. He's on Facebook, albeit very seldom. He does check it. Mark Blackburn. Mary, thanks so much. I found Paul's Facebook page, which you are correct. He hasn't used since 2015. Still, next time in Colorado Springs, I may try to look him up. Paul Cohen. Mark, so nice to read your posts. I'm looking forward to reconnecting with you. Wow, it was nice reading of your trip to Mexico. Very cool. Interesting how you had that intent for so many years. I think our visit to Mexico and Guatemala long ago led to a couple-year volunteer in Laos, Southeast Asia. Mark Blackburn. Paul, great to hear from you and know you are alive and presumably well. I vividly remember your father narrating that slideshow to this day. Traveling that far from home was not so common in those days. How long have you been in Colorado Springs? Paul? Yes, mostly well, thank you. Good to hear you as well. Wow, this is an amazing story. So fun that you did that. I'm enjoying seeing your video posts. Looks like you had an incredible trip. Are you back in the United States now? And a friend of mine made that same climb this time of year, just 2 years ago. We really enjoyed it. I moved to the Springs about 25 years ago and like it. Are you in Seattle? Fletcher wrote, oh my God, Paul Cohen. Facebook has become old home week for me recently. I don't know if you remember me or not. It's fun hearing what my classmates are doing all these years later. Happy to hear tidbits about you. Mark Blackburn, Mark McClellan, and others. Yay Mariners, Ensign, and or Newport Harbor High School alumni. So then I send Paul a request. I see that Paul's on Facebook, so I sent him a Facebook friendly request. Paul responds, Richard, Paul Cohen has confirmed you that you're friends on Facebook. So yesterday, I was looking at Mark Blackburn's chapter. I decided to add Paul's picture. This is from the previous chapter. The classmate whose father gave the presentation was Paul Cohen. Does anyone remember what became of him? I suspect he went to Corona Del Mar, not Newport High School. I get out my Newport Harbor yearbook and snap this picture and insert it above. I send Paul a message. Hi Paul, it's been many moons since we've last seen each other. I was visiting some friends last summer in Colorado Springs. I tried to look you up. Anyway, maybe next time. Paul. First, Mary Picard. Mark, now my friend Rick. Haha, can't believe it. What's happening? Wow. Rick, earliest of friends. So then we get on the phone and start talking for a few hours. Now we haven't talked since high school, but we had instant communication. It's amazing to see how a series of events connect each one of us. If Mary Lou Picard didn't contact Paul, or Mark didn't do a post of his adventures on Facebook, I wouldn't have been in contact with Paul. I remember as a kid, I was fascinated by Paul's house. It was a Japanese-style house. From what I remember, they had a courtyard with the rooms coming off from it. Instead of having ordinary doors, they had soji doors. Now as a kid, I loved anything from the Far East. I loved things outside of the box. Paul's house was stuck in a neighborhood with all standard houses of the time. The front of the house was standard, but nobody knew the jewel inside. Paul's dad was a doctor. I saw him a few times when I was a kid. Paul's dad was my brother's David, primary doctor. Back then, it wasn't unusual for a doctor treating a patient smoking a cigar. Paul and I were great friends in elementary school. I learned over the phone that Paul had been to about the same number of countries that I have been, around 35. He spent 2 years in Laos doing voluntary work. Paul tried to go to India. He had the plane tickets, but unfortunately the Bhopal gas tragedy happened in India. When Paul tried to get a visa, he was denied. Paul was a lawyer at the time. The Indian government wouldn't give him a visa. They thought he was going to India to work on the Bhopal gas tragedy. Paul tried to tell him he was going just as a tourist, but they wouldn't listen. It's a small world. Paul's mom got remarried. Her husband was a member of the Beak family from Newport Beach. I went to junior high school with his niece, Carol. This is the story from the Balboa Island Museum about the Beak family. In 1919, Joseph Allen Beak obtained the rights from the city of Newport Beach to provide a ferry service across the Newport Harbor between Balboa Island and the Balboa Peninsula. Before starting the ferry service, Beak owned the Ark. The Ark consisted of a giant rowboat with a small engine, which Beak used as the first ferry vessel. The Ark carried oars in the event of engine failure. There was no regular scheduled service, and customers telephoned Beak when they needed a ride across the harbor. In 1919, Beak charged a nickel, 5 cents per person. 3 years after commencing operation, Beak built the Fat Ferry. This vessel held 20 passengers. Beak later built a small one, a car barge with a Fat Ferry pushed across in front of it. In the 1950s, Beak built 3 double-ended wooden boats for his ferry service: the Admiral, the Commandeer, and the Captain. These 2 boats are still in service and have transported over 2 million persons. Each ferry holds 3 cars and 75 people. As of 2007, the Beaks charge $1 per adult, $2 per vehicle, and 50 cents for children ages 5 through 11, $1.25 for adults on bikes, 75 cents for children on bikes, and $1.50 for motorcycles. Children under the age of 5 are free. The ferry boat needs constant maintenance, but this does not usually interrupt the ferry service. For 2 weeks in 2008, the ferry service shut down for an extended period for the first time in 50 years to rebuild the automobile ramps leading to the boats. Currently, Beak's 3 sons run the business and has been the family for close to 100 years. Paul tells me his stepdad is an incredible character. He is in his 90s. He's driven the same Volkswagen since the 70s. Who knows how many miles he has traveled on it? Paul says he has a unique ability for photographic memory. Here's a definition of photographic memory: the ability to remember information or visual images in great detail. He also loves computers. He was involved in the early days when computer science was still in its infancy. I would love to meet him someday. He seems like the character I would love to be around. Paul says he loves to travel on the Amtrak train between Los Angeles and San Francisco. His favorite part is when the train would pass through the Hollister Ranch. Paul said each time he would reflect that the Fletcher brothers spent an incredible amount of time there during high school. Paul went to the Fletcher School in Ojai for 2 years. Paul met the family that sold their ranch to the Macro Corporation in the 60s. I wonder how the family that sold the ranch feels today. For a surfer, it'd be like selling the keys to heaven. Paul said he would tell stories to his kids about my brother and I. Paul remembers the time in 5th grade where John and I would switch classes. Paul remembers that John and I would switch shirts and then go to each other's class. All the students knew my brother and I were playing a joke. At some point in time, the entire class would start laughing. Everyone except for the teacher was on in this joke. The teacher would wonder, what's going on? Eventually the teacher would catch on and we would all laugh. These were simple times. I don't know if today the school system would appreciate this. I knew Paul's brother's Nat in high school. My brother and I were on the same track team and cross-country team in high school. Nat was best friends with Bruce Charles, a great neighbor of ours. I remember in either 5th or 6th grade, they dressed up as surfers and carried a surfboard for Halloween. I was impressed. I distinctly remember that I said, someday I'm going to be a surfer. During my phone conversations with Paul, he mentioned that with my travels to India and my love for meditation, did I ever hear about his second cousin? He was somewhat of a black sheep in the family. His name was Baba Ramdas, formerly known as Richard Albert. Did I know Ramdas? During my late teens and early 20s, Ramdas was famous in the meditation community. Richard Albert was a young psychologist during the 60s. He, along with Timothy Leary, began to explore the effects of psychotropic substances on the mind. Both of them worked at Harvard University. They began to do clinical studies on the effects of LSD and psilocybin. At that time, they weren't illegal in the country. At some point, they got fired for doing the research. They had graduate students who actively participated in their research. But one time, they had an undergraduate student. Consequently, they were fired. Timothy Leary's famous slogan was, tune in, turn on, drop out. Ramdas wrote the book, Be Here Now, a popular book during the 60s and 70s. Today, it's considered a modern spiritual classic. In fact, I read this book at Ananda in Nevada City before I went on my journey. To be honest, at that time, I really didn't understand the book. Books like these take practical experience to understand and to incorporate these ideas in the book. Ramdas started using drugs and meditated for the rest of his life. He used to say that drugs were training wheels. At some point, you don't need them anymore. I tried LSD once, and never again. The state of meditation brings one into our natural state, where we don't need anything artificial to open the door within. So I was completely surprised when Paul told me his second cousin was Ramdas. I saw him speak in Santa Fe, New Mexico during the 70s. I had been impressed by his work. He had tremendous influence in the population at large. He helped to bring meditation to be common among our society. During the 70s, it was considered you were on the fringe of society if you meditated. You were strange. Nowadays, yoga is mainstream. You can practice it almost everywhere. Synchronicity is so common, yet most of the time we don't see it. Signposts are everywhere, yet we don't have eyes to see. Thanks, Paul, for being my lifelong friend. I'm so happy that we are connected again. We are all on an incredible journey of life.
The Elephant Gun. Once upon a time, in 1972, little Ricky and Collie were hitchhiking from Kenya to South Africa. Somewhere along the way, they got picked up by two intelligent black Africans. We got into the car. After a few hours of driving, they got out of the car and shot two cows with the elephant gun. We thought we were next. They got into the car and they said, "Oh, we just shot two elephants." We agreed with them. We knew we shouldn't cause any conflict, or maybe we would be next. Being shot at. Once upon a time, Anna and I visited Collie's mom. She had a house in Baja California. Along the way, we stopped off at Matishan Bay. This bay was known by surfers since the 60s. On a good day, you can ride away for almost a mile. The only drawback is at sunrise and sunset, the no-see-ums come out by the millions. One day we took a walk up the point past the bay. At some point, both of us realized that we should turn around. We couldn't quite pinpoint it. We turned around and started to walk back to Matishan Bay. Well, we were right to turn around. As we were walking, a bullet whizzed so close we could hear it. We didn't turn around, but slowly walked away. Randy Stabler. Here's an interesting fact in my life as father, aka Papa, with my kids. We sold a house in Newport Heights, 1993. Packed up a 20-foot container with all our worldly possessions. 4 kids in tow, youngest 2 years old, and moved to Hong Kong. Business and adventures was calling. After a move to Hong Kong, I traded from Taiwan to Israel and all countries between these ports to support my family and live the adventure. Creating businesses in over 13 or so countries. Cool, yeah. Still have an export-import business in Macau, Dominica. Macau, our final home setting for the last 5 years, after 3 years in Hong Kong. My wife, at the time, and child were the true troopers. Thanks you for reading. Anyone to hearing our 8 years living in Asia? Randy. This journey is a story that Randy wrote on his journey to Afghanistan. It comes right out of a James Bond movie. I was in Afghanistan 50 years ago today. Randy only had 5 days to pull this off. I can't believe that he did this. The waves of the world are very different than ours. To simply comprehend that Randy did this in 5 extraordinary days. His daughter Misha was going to graduate from Newport Harbor High. This story is better than any novel. When you have visited these far-off places and you hear other people's stories, you understand how dangerous the world can be. Randy nonchalantly tells the story. Randy, history. 1993-94, Hong Kong. Developing businesses via fax machine. Internet in its infancy or non-existence to parts of the world I was communicating with no service create Stay Blued business. Stay Blued was sold to CRC Aerosol in 1993. I, along with Dad, Laird, and Judy Protel, negotiated an exclusive contract with CRC for me to continue the Stay Blue market sales presence in Asia and Middle East, which I earlier developed. Thus moved to Hong Kong with family and sell off my Newport home. Move wasn't best for all who experienced the China, Hong Kong, Mekong education experience. While servicing and developing business via fax, I hit on Afghanistan, requesting 20 feet containers of high-quality vehicle gear oil that is 80 drums, each drum weighing 450 pounds. The logistics payment alone was daunting and challenging. Inquiry came from Kabul via Islamabad, Pakistan. No easy task to get such an acquire. I responded again via fax. Their response, the gear oil, was for Russian vehicles left behind from Russia's rapid retreat in late 80s defeat. At that time, 1994, the outside world was not aware of the Taliban. I admit I was horny to do a big deal, with a family to support and grow a business in Asia, and I loved the adventure of it all. Fortunate me living life. A year or so later learned, after sale, the brutal place Afghanistan, especially towards women. I flew into Lahore, Pakistan, from Hong Kong early June '94. I had 5 days to get the deal done, because after the 5 days, I had 4 more days to be in Newport for Misha's high school graduation. I was not going to miss it, probably just racked up enough miles to fly around the world. Arrived Lahore and promptly driven to Islamabad for the night. Next day, early a.m., woken to attend the calls to the Mass, the largest in the world. I attended, wash feet, the service. Then we prospective Afghan customers loaded into a crew cab, took Toyota pickup, and headed towards Peshawar. At Peshawar, my Afghanis minders wanted to share with me an open market. Ah, yeah, all along the way ate great local food, including raw goat brain with lots of garlic, herbs, and peppers. The open market, Peshawar border to Afghanistan, is set out like a swap meet, beautiful rugs laid out. But instead, but instead of general domestic goods, there is a huge array of weapons: AK-47, mortars, machine guns, handheld rocket-propelled grenades, etc., and ammunition for all, hundreds bartering for the goods. I felt very uncomfortable among all the weapons meant to kill. My minders, customers, thought they were sharing a beautiful open market. After being showed the pride of the country, Mosque Open Market, we loaded into the cab crew to drive into Kabul via Khyber Pass. If you don't know of Khyber Pass history, look it up. Very famous. All this, all this with Himalayas in deep foreground, dicey drive with deep river valleys, and no road guards to deflect you from going into the edge into 1,000 or more foot drop into the valley. Arrived Kabul to, to complete the gear oil deal. I was promptly served locally brewed beer and tea brought in by young boys. Yeah, I know you are thinking, this is Muslim country. Beer, yes. Deal done after midnight beer. The transaction dollars was a logistic nightmare. 3 banks involving all requiring IC's letter of credit and BL Bill of Rights landing, starting from the docks of Stay Blue at Rancho Dominguez, California, destined for Kabul. Drove back to Pakistan, 4.5 days out. Arrived Islamabad an afternoon on finished a 5th day. I was knocked off flight to Calcutta, India, due to unrest, saber rattlings between each country, and told there were no more flights for next 2 to 3 days. But for an extra fee, I could catch a flight to Indonesia that would connect me with a flight in Hong Kong to meet USA flight. I was set up. Fortunately, I was prepared with Swiss Army knife knockoffs from Hong Kong with $20 USD dollars wrapped around each knife. I have been here before. Got on the phone and was seated for the next 6 or more hours to an aging woman, constantly coughing up blood into a handkerchief, anxious what I was going to catch. I made Misha's graduation. Randy Stabler, message 2. My time in Baghdad. I was in the LE local economy, the streets, almost daily, 2003, 2004. Just rummaging up these photos, the group of Iraqi teens was a spontaneous shot. 2 girls happy to see me, one confused, and the boy, "You're next." Car bomber. Second shot, our soldier in an improvised armor with sandbags, 4x4s, and steel doors with his office chair bolted to the Humvee deck. Checkout pick and mare. Crazy place was Baghdad. I was subcontractor, chefing for the intelligence and Blackwater community before we knew Blackwater, 2003. Carl Sagan. The following YouTube videos encapsulates the meaning of Once Upon a Time. Each time I watch these, I get goosebumps. I hope you do too. This is the essence of storytelling and myths. Being odd is the state of mind that transforms the mundane into the sublime state of mind. Prem Rawat. I put this in a Google search. How many miles does Prem Rawat travel in a year? To fulfill his vision of inspiring people and practice peace, he maintains a demanding travel schedule, flying an average of 100,000 nautical miles and attending some 90 speaking engagements across the globe each year. Just think, Prem has been doing this for over 50 years. That's absolutely incredible. I don't know about you, but I've done a lot of traveling at the same time. I truly disliked flying. My body does not like it at all. Yet Prem travels constantly all over the world. I'm completely in awe how he does this. Not only the traveling, but he also flies his own plane. He has other pilots, yet he loves to fly. His stories have always mesmerized me. I first met him in India when I was 16 years old. This was in 1971. He was only 13 years old. I was in Delhi, out of a festival where almost 1 million people attended. I remember Prem giving several talks. He talked about inner knowledge. He talked about you were built to have this experience within. It is part of your true existence. It is never born, nor will it ever die. He said, I can show you how to discover the jewel within. Nobody can do the digging for you. You must dig for the ultimate diamond within you. But I can show you where to dig. For me, that made all the difference in the world. I've been practicing this knowledge since 1971. One can meditate for 1 trillion years, and still it's a drop in the bucket in eternity. This world would be in a better place if we all discovered peace inside of us. Prem's message is simple. Peace lies inside of you. The world will not give you peace. Prem has always been an incredible storyteller, even going back to when I was 18 years old in India. He would tell amazing stories. He probably knew thousands of stories. When he was quite young, when he would go to sleep, he would listen to many great stories. This became his second nature. an incredible storyteller. Many people say that it takes around 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert. Just think Prem has been doing this for over 50 years. Stories to ponder over. These stories are meant to be pondered over. They are not just stories. There's a meaning behind them all. Many other stories below I heard in India when I was just 13 years old, and Prem at that time was only 13 years old. These are classical Indian stories which have been told for centuries. There is a hidden meaning behind each story. Ponder this over. It may help you on your journey.
The jeweler and the thief. Well, let's continue with this incredible story. The dragons, when they first saw the youngsters entering the cave many moons ago, weren't interested in the slightest in training man. You see, man was one of their major troubles. There's even a dragon slayer profession in the British Isles. Yet, at that same time, they could see the potential in these youngsters. As a matter of fact, they were more evolved than them when they were young. Back then, the dragons didn't even have a glimmer of light. So, they had an internal discussion amongst themselves. Do you think we can train them? Do you think they can change? You see, even in China and Tibet, war ruled the land. Anger was the norm. Mind you, these youngsters had a combination of light and darkness. They could see both sides of the coin. So the dragons decided to train them. Now their training wasn't like today. Today, children in schools are bored. They are taught to use just memory. They are taught to remember facts. They are not taught to use your mind and think. The dragons are experts in this field. They are the master wizards of Hogwarts today. In fact, they are thousands of years ahead in development. Hogwarts teachers would be in nursery school. The dragons would have an advanced PhD studies in the universe. They were off the charts. The dragons had a unique style of teaching. You could say it was revolutionary today. They taught by using games, play, and fireside chats. The first game they taught was hide and seek. This was a very practical game. They had a series of talks about the universe. They were taught that the universe existed inside of them. Well, to be frank, that was completely over their heads. They couldn't even understand one word. So the dragons played a game of hide and seek. The dragons would hide. The youngsters closed their eyes and counted to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ready or not, here we come. They would open their eyes, and all the dragons were gone. The dragons had rules they couldn't be decayed. All the kids were completely shocked when they opened their eyes. All the dragons disappeared. They all crashed in surprise. As you know, dragons are quite large. They weigh thousands of pounds. This game went on for around 6 months or so. Finally, at one fireside chat, the dragons told this practical story. Imagine 2 young men walking down the road. They would
headed to a town 5 days from their current destination. One of their men was a jeweler. The other man was a thief. The thief knew this man had a very precious jewel that he was carrying. As I said, both of them were going to the same town. They decided to travel together. They had a long journey ahead of them. Hours passed. They were quite tired and exhausted. Fortunately, there was a simple inn ahead of them. They both decided to spend the night there and share a room together. Both of them decided to have dinner together. The jeweler went first, and a few minutes later, the thief joined them. While the jeweler was holding the table for him, the thief was looking all over for the precious jewel. He was quite dumbfounded. He was the greatest thief in the land. They had dinner and went to bed immediately. They weren't in the mood to drink the hell and party into the night. Well, guess what? This went on for several days. Finally, they reached their destination. By then, the thief was totally confused. He thought, this is going to be an easy still. He said to the jeweler, I'm a thief. As a matter of fact, I'm a king of the thieves. I knew you were carrying a precious jewel. Every night, I knew you carried a precious jewel. I knew you hid the jewel inside of the room. Every night, I would search all over for it. I got quite frustrated when I couldn't find it. Where did you put it? I'm dying for an answer. The jeweler said, I knew you were a thief. I knew you wanted to steal the jewel. Every night, I would hide it in a place you would never look. The thief said, and where is that? The jeweler said, under your own pillow. The thief knew he was outwitted and outsmarted. Well, the kids loved this story. They were well acquainted with thieves and jewelers. They went through their towns quite frequently. The dragon said, let's play a game of hide and seek again. This time, focus on your breath. Close your eyes. To their amazement, the dragons appeared inside of them. They couldn't believe it. How could all the dragons appear to them inside of their being? This was the starting point of their incredible adventures. Now, when they played hide and seek, they knew where to look. A single but necessary step took place. They knew it was both an inward and outward journey. The youngsters were thrilled. Each time they played the game, the youngsters knew where to look. They loved to play this game. All the first-time students had to go through the same baby steps that others went through. You see, this path is 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. You learn from your progress and your mistakes. Never give up.
An old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he said to the boy. It's a terrible fight and it's between 2 wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. He continued, the other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute, but then asked his grandfather, which wolf will win? The old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." Once upon a time, there were two twin brothers named Little Ricky and Little Johnny. Little Johnny was a genius in picking up and learning new things, while Little Ricky was what you would call on the slow side. It took him hundreds of tries to learn new things. For example, one Christmas morning, their wonderful parents presented them both with brand new bicycles. Both of them were so excited. Well, they took them outdoors. Little Johnny hopped on his and immediately started riding down the block. Well, Little Ricky didn't have the same luck. In fact, it was kind of funny to see how clumsy he was. He didn't give up. He knew deep down inside he could learn how to ride this. It took him about a month. The first time he realized that he was actually riding the bicycle, he was filled with joy. He was so grateful. I did it. I didn't give up. This incident carried him all throughout his life. Every time he had to learn something new, he remembered the experience of learning how to ride a bike. In fact, years later, his wife said that he learned things so quickly. Little Ricky just smiled. He knew that life taught him such a precious lesson at such a young age. Never give up. Persevere. You can learn anything. It may just take you time. Little Ricky loved ethnic foods. He was brought up since he was born to eat ethnic foods. He absolutely loved them. Yet, he never knew how to cook them. One day in high school, he enrolled in a cooking class. He wanted to learn how to cook. To his amazement, he learned that there was cooking recipes that you can follow to make each dish. A recipe usually has a list of ingredients along with the actual step-by-steps needed to make the dish. He was so excited. From that precious course, he learned hundreds of recipes throughout the years. He took the same concept to his own personal life. He learned how to use spices like kindness and patience in his life. He would sprinkle these on his daily actions. He knew that life was an incredible adventure. He added these precious spices to his everyday affairs. Ponder this over. What spices can you use to enhance your life? Kindness, tolerance, patience, love, and compassion. These are incredible spices that the world loves. Learn how to avoid the spice of anger, being a bully, and fighting. These never are good in the end. They are old habits from the past.
The frog in the well. You are the universe. You just don't know it. This is the central theme of the dragons. They reached a growth of awareness where they became the sun, moon, and stars, and were walking around in dragon bodies. They realized they were eternal. They were beyond time and space. The dragons also knew that humans had the same capability. They were curious about that. The dragons knew that man came from the stars. They were stardust. Yet the village around them in Tibet and China at that time had no idea of who they truly are. The dragons were once in the same state of awareness as the humans. They were angry, hateful, worried, and full of grief. Yet over time, they realized their potential. They needed a story that could reflect
how large they felt, yet how small in reality they lived in. So, there goes the story. Once upon a time, a frog lived in a well. This frog thought he was a know-it-all. This frog thought the water in my well is the largest in the world. This was in fact quite a large well. The villages use it for the community. Anyway, this frog bragged a lot and told all the people who were strangers to the well how vast the water is in the well. One day, a stranger came who lived near the ocean. The frog came up to the stranger and said, "The water in my well is far grander than any water in the well in the world." The stranger said, "Well, according to my experience, the water in your well is probably one of the smallest I've ever seen." Well, a fight ensued with the water worms. It was going out of control. Both sides were putting wood on the fire. Finally, they both calmed down. All the villagers came wondering what was going on. It was quite the scene. Well, the villagers and frogs said to the man, "Can you prove it? Can you show us a place where water is larger than our well?" So to make a long story short, a small group of villagers and the frog traveled to the ocean. They couldn't believe what they saw. An endless body of water everywhere. They were dumbfounded. Never in their world did they see such a precious sight. The stranger laughed and said, "Now, this is a large body of water." The villagers and frog couldn't agree more. Their well wasn't even a drop of water compared to the ocean. The dragons told this story to the youngsters. They reminded the kids of playing hide and seek and peekaboo. The dragons would appear to them inside. Well, the dragon said, "This is the frog in the well. This is the starting point in your incredible journey of life. Inside of you lies the infinite ocean of love. You have the potential to tap into this. In fact, you are this ocean. This is your true nature. You should see how wide open were the eyes opened from the children. They were completely mesmerized by this story. They were just some mumble-jumble words. The dragons were talking about their own personal experience. They were telling the kids that you could ultimately have the same experience. It's a moment-by-moment conscious journey. Baby steps are taken along the way.
When I was young, I heard the story about 3 blind men touching an elephant. Each man touched a different part of the elephant. One touched the elephant's ear, another touched his feet, while the last touched the tusk. They began to discuss their experience and a huge fight began. "I'm right and you're wrong. I know all the answers. You're a fool to believe in that. What a child you are." Yet they all had their own individual experience. It was a piece of the puzzle. Not the puzzle itself, but a piece. Are we like the blind man touching the elephant? My religion is better than your religion. I'm going to heaven while you're going to hell. I'm going to declare war on you. I'm going to convert you. Religion has a piece of the puzzle. It is not the puzzle itself. Each religion is different and unique. The essence is the same. Which part of the elephant did you touch? Maybe it's about time to be open to something new. Your enemy is talking about the same thing you are. He just has a different piece, a different point of view. In the end, the essence is the same.
Stop the noise in your head. As the children began to learn how to meditate, they saw how powerful the mind is. They never noticed that before. They asked the dragon how to stop the noise in my head. Of course, all the dragons laughed. They laugh because everyone goes through this. You see, the mind is the most difficult thing to control in the universe. The majority of man reacts to every situation. Man is reacting. The wise man learns to be proactive. They understand the basic law. It's my will alone. I set my mind in motion. Now, that's very easy to say, but hard to do. All people who learn how to meditate in the beginning have this problem. In the East, they call it monkey mind. The monkey goes from one branch to another. It can't be controlled. Well, when they first started to learn how to meditate, they clearly saw this from first-hand experience. The dragons told a wonderful story each time the subject was brought up. They told a story where a man saves a genie. Nobody knows exactly how this man saved him. Well, the genie told this man, you can have as many wishes as you want. The man said, wow, that's incredible. I love that idea. The genie said, well, there's a catch. The man said, what's that? You must always give one wish after another. If you don't, I will chop your head off with a sword. Are you sure you want to continue with this? The man hesitates for a moment and says, reluctant, sure. Well, the genie said, what's your first wish? The man gives one wish after another. It seems like when one wish is granted, he has to give another. He didn't even have one opportunity to enjoy, even for a second, the previous wish. He was getting tired and couldn't even go to sleep. The genie was always harassing him and saying, what's your next wish? Well, fortunately, there was a wise man nearby. He went to the wise man and sincerely asked for help. This boon was turning into a curse. The wise man whispered into his ear. Well, the genie demanded another wish, or he would chop off his head. The young man said, go to the forest and find the huge log. Your wish is my command. In a second he returned with the huge log. The genie said with a smile, give me a wish, I will chop off your head. As you can see, the genie wasn't particularly nice. So the young man told the genie to go up and down the pole. When I need you, I will give you another command. The young man could relax and enjoy all the wishes he gave to the genie. The genie knew he was outsmarted by this wise man. The young boy enjoyed his life and helped others in the community. He eventually learned about the dragons and helped tremendously his fellow man. The dragons said that the genie is the mind. The mind wants to control you versus the other way around. By placing your mind on your breath, the genie will go up and down the log and set you free. Meditation is the key to bring awareness to your mind. The mind is either your friend or foe. Everyone in the universe has to learn how to control the mind. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all? What if we had an actual mirror that exists inside of us? Wouldn't that be an incredible fairy tale? Now, what if I told you that you are the universe? You just don't know it. How's that for a fairy tale? You see, your mirror is dusty. Throughout your life, nobody told you that this mirror exists inside of you. Well, let the fairy tale begin. You can start learning how to clean your precious mirror. You can start by being kind in each and every moment. The more you are kind, the more you will clean your mirror. Learn how to meditate and enjoy the silence inside of you. At first, you may get bored, but the more you practice, the more you are clearing your mirror. Remember, this is play, not work. Cleaning your mirror is like removing huge boulders that you carry around. They weigh you down. Each time you remove a boulder, you get lighter and lighter. You see, you are your own Prince Charming. You have the capability to remove all obstacles inside of you. Now that's a fairy tale. Ponder this over. You are the universe. You just don't know it. This is a beautiful fable by Hans Christian Andersen. It's a beautiful summer day. The sun shines warmly on the old house near a river. Behind the house, a mother duck is sitting on 10 eggs to chick. One by one, all the eggs break open. All except one. This one is the biggest egg of all. Mother duck sits and sits on the big egg. At last it breaks open. The chick. Out jumps the last baby duck. It looks big and strong. It is gray and ugly. The next day, Mother duck takes all her little ducks to the water. She jumps into it. All her baby ducks jump in. The big ugly duckling jumps in too. They all swim and play together. The ugly duckling swims better than all the other ducklings. Quack, quack. Come with me to the farmyard, says Mother Duck to her baby ducks, and they all follow her there. The farmyard is very noisy. The poor duckling is so unhappy there. The hens pick him, the roosters flies at him, the ducks bite him, the farmer kicks him. Alas, one day he runs away. He comes to a river. He sees many beautiful big birds swimming there. Their feathers are so white, their necks so long, their wings so pretty. The little duckling looks and looks at them. He wants to be with them. He wants to stay and watch them. He knows they are swans. Oh, how he wants to be beautiful like them. Now it is winter. Everything is white with snow. The river is covered with ice. The ugly duckling is very cold and unhappy. Spring comes once again. The sun shines warmly. Everything is fresh and green. One morning, the ugly duckling sees the beautiful swans again. He knows them. He wants so much to swim with them in the river, but he is afraid of them. He wants to die. So he runs into the river. He looks into the water. There, in the water, he sees a beautiful swan. It is he. He is no more an ugly duckling. He is a beautiful white swan. We are all swans. We just don't have the eyes to see. Look inside of your heart. You will see your true nature. The wind and the sun were disputing which was stronger. Suddenly he saw a traveler coming down the road, and the sun said, "I see a way to decide our dispute. Whatever of us can cause the traveler to take off his cloak should be regarded as the stronger. You begin." So the sun retired behind a cloud, and the wind began to blow as hard as it could upon the traveler. But harder he blew, the more closely the traveler wrapped his cloak around him, till at last the wind had to give up in despair. Then the sun came out and shined in all its glory upon the traveler, who soon found it too hot to walk with his cloak on. Kindness affects more than severity. Once upon a time, a wise man was having a conversation with the sun. He told the sun that darkness did not like them. He felt that the sun ruined everything for him. Darkness loves to keep everyone in a state of ignorance. Darkness loves to see humanity bickering and fighting with one another. The sun just loved to shine and give love, kindness, and compassion to all. Well, the sun said to the wise man, "Bring darkness to me, and we can have a wonderful conversation." The wise man said, "I will bring him to you tomorrow." While the sun waited and waited. The next day, darkness never came. He waited for over a month. Darkness never showed up. You see, darkness is only the absence of light. The sun is always shining, so darkness can never appear. Discover the light inside of you. That is your true nature.